Welcome, Greek U Nation, to episode number 624 of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Mike Ayalon, CEO of Greek University. I'm a speaker and an author. Our ninth book just came out last week. It's called From Letters to Leaders, The Legacy of Service. So I want you to go and pick up that book on Amazon today. It's incredible. I think it's the best in the series. We actually call these episodes the Fraternity Foodie Podcast because there's nothing like great food to bring college students together. Fun fact, forgiveness has always been a really difficult thing for me. But as I get older, I do think I'm getting closer and closer to getting there for my own sake, not necessarily for those who wronged me. So today we're going to talk a little bit more about survival, healing, all of these things from childhood depression. And I know there's a lot of college students that have dealt with similar trauma and other issues growing up. So we're going to talk a little bit more about this. Linda Summersea is the author of The Girl with the Black and Blue Doll, an honest and optimistic book about persevering through childhood depression in a dysfunctional household. Here's what she has learned. The healing child will always be present in the adult. But in her case, the survival and healing have now become almost forgiveness. Although she spent most of her life as a loner, most of her peers would have never guessed what was hiding inside. Linda's adult persona has always been quite able to present a strong front. In addition to expressing herself through writing, she loves public speaking, radio, and television as mediums of expression, along with the arts that have brought her so much joy. Welcome to the show, Linda.
Thank you. I am so pleased to be here. That was a great intro, by the way.
Well, thank you. I think I summarized it pretty
Sure
well.
did. Sure did.
We have to talk about your memoir right off the bat. It's called The Girl with the Black and Blue Doll, and it shares your childhood that was growing up really in a volatile, emotionally neglectful home. So I'm wondering for our listeners, can you let them know what inspired you to finally tell this story now?
Yes, absolutely. The scene was me in the car listening to the radio, NPR, all things considered, 29 years ago. I was waiting for my husband to come out of AutoZone, and they were interviewing um, Angela's Ashes author, Frank McCourt. And he was talking about his very dirt poor childhood on a farm in Ireland. And it was only 9 minutes. But after hearing that, I just felt like I had to write my memoir. And he grew up on a farm. He was dirt poor. We weren't dirt poor, but we were definitely lower income. My father made it clear that we were the factory caste. In other words, he didn't want me to go to college, but
Mm.
that's another thing. So anyway, and then Frank McCourt had his entire career as a teacher in New York City. Then he wrote the memoir after that. And the same with me. I wrote mine afterwards. So his was up to 18, mine was 3 to 21. And it did take me 8 drafts in 9 years to do it. So I actually came full circle with something I had always wanted to do. I always wanted to be a writer, but poor counseling, etc.
Mm.
And
Well,
plus,
good for you.
plus the creative arts did well for me because I love everything about it.
Yeah, good for you to persevere and get that book published. I think it's important because a lot of people have similar experiences. And you
Mhm.
actually described yourself as a youth at risk long before you even knew that that term actually existed. So
Mhm.
I'm wondering, how did all of those early experiences shape the person that you became in college?
Well, on the farm, I was really isolated. In fact, before kindergarten, my siblings and I never met other children, just our cousins. So when we went to kindergarten, it was the world out there, the big wide world, and I didn't even speak until third grade in class. I found one friend who would go be with me on the playground, and but youth at risk for me was being withdrawn, shy, and depressed, and being a 1950s crybaby. Every day I came home from school and cried. So you can tell by those descriptive things. When I went to college, it was freedom. And freedom from sadness and fighting and all this bickering of my parents. And I was just glad to be in a quiet place where I met kindred spirits. This was the hippie years. I was class of 72. So, things were in full swing. And of course, that's one thing about oops, you still there?
Yeah. Hmm.
Okay, I've lost the picture here, but oops. All right, there we go. Okay. Yes. The thing about those years was everyone was tie-dye and bell bottoms, and that turned out to be a positive thing in preventing you from judging the monetary value of your peers. You
Mm.
didn't know who was rich or who was poor. Everybody was, tie-dye and bell bottoms. And I became very independent during those years too. In fact, in 1969, I hitchhiked to Washington, D.C. to march against the Vietnam War. So, in those days, you could do things like that
Mm.
if you were brave enough.
Yeah.
But
Today, I would not recommend hitchhiking to
no, no,
DC.
no, no, absolutely not. Absolutely not. But so
Mm.
anyway, when I got to college, it was a great thing. It was
Yeah.
really good to be, to meet people and be understood.
Yeah, that resonates with me as well. My parents were going through a divorce at that time, and I left to go to college, and I was very happy to get out of the household because they were
Yeah,
just constantly fighting and yelling with each other. And for me, I appreciate peace and calm,
yep.
as a household. So for me, in creating the household with my wife today, that was just very important. I said, I don't want
Hmm.
to grow up or my kids to grow up in a
Hmm.
household where we're constantly fighting and yelling at each other. We
Hmm.
have to figure out a better way to communicate and work through those differences without, yelling and screaming and
Yes.
all kinds of chaos.
Yes, it's funny you should mention that. That was the one flaw I had, uh, taking care of discussing differences. I remember I had a major fight with my roommate, and it was only because I had never learned to communicate those things.
Mm,
And so, yes, so
yeah.
my dorm counselor saved me on that one. Broke
Okay.
up the fight.
That's good. That's good. Now, when I read your book, it includes all kinds of vivid and I would say sometimes frightening memories. You're talking about burnt kitchens, gunshots, emotional isolation. I'm wondering which scene was the hardest for you to write?
Well, it wasn't so much any individual scene because while those things were traumatizing, I mean, my mother almost burnt the house down by
Hmm.
leaving oil on the stove under the fire, while she went out to get something from the bread man who was in the country. They just drive up and chat, chat, chat while the house is, going up in flames. But things like that was pretty traumatizing, especially for three little kids walking home from school and seeing a fire truck go roaring through, and you don't realize until you come over the hill that, uh-oh, yeah. So, but the hardest thing for me was writing about my father, because my father's special skill was making his superpower was making us each feel like we were the least loved of his children. And he, so things that related to that. I remember one time I was in the car with him in Worcester, Massachusetts, which is a decent sized city. It's not Boston, but there's a very, very steep hill there. Two lanes on each side, up and down, busy Saturday morning, and all of a sudden, our car lost its brakes.
Oh my God.
That's the time when you had brake fluids in the brake line. So it was broken, and the car was careening down the hill, and my father was holding left and right, goes into a driveway and next to a gas station. Fortunately, there was a pile of dirt in the way. And when he gets out of the car, he smokes a cigarette, of course. Then he goes to the guys inside, brings the car around, fixes it. Long story short, we get home. We sit down to the supper table, and my father tells about that, and he says, "Yep, it's all Linda's fault. She's a jinx."
Oh my God.
Saying that
Really?
about
That's
a
rough.
9-year-old. About a 9-year-old. I didn't even know what a jinx was, but I knew he was telling my whole family that I just caused the brakes to go out on the car.
Oh my
You know,
God.
and one more quickie little thing like that shows my father's inner workings. Every Friday, payday at the factory, he would come home with two 5-cent candy bars. All candy bars are 5 cents then. He one was a Hershey bar, and the other was an almond joy. The Hershey bar was for him. The single almond joy, the two little chunks of almond joy, were for the four of us, my three siblings and my mother.
Mm.
So my mother would get out a knife and she would cut the sections, and we got this teeny weeny, almost an inch piece of almond joy.
Hmm.
So, what the heck? He didn't want to spend an extra 15 cents. But that's what I mean. That's what he was like.
Wow, wow, that tells a lot for sure.
Mm.
You talk a lot about the emotionally, the isolation, et cetera. And I think many college students are really still developmentally teenagers when they enter their first semester of college. So, what do you see as the most overlooked emotional challenge during that transition to college?
Well, during that transition, it's whether you have the attitude and personality to make friends is really a thing.
Mm,
Because if you had your own social circle in high school, it's sort of a transition from that. You're all moving right along and go to your places in college or uh, in either dorms or fraternities or sororities, and you meet like-minded people. But if you didn't have that social circle, if you were a shy person, more of a loner, then it's going to be tougher. And so I would say that uh, it might seem insignificant when someone's quiet and everything, but then here's where your peer circle in college and your dorm people and other adults need to keep an eye out for the differences between being just a loner and being really withdrawn into body dysmorphic disorder.
mm, that's a good point. Well, let's talk about that. You lived with severe depression, you lived with body dysmorphic disorder before it really even had a name. So, for those who are unfamiliar with body dysmorphic disorder, what does that actually look like in real life?
Yes, yes. And remember, I'm not a clinician, of course. I want to point that out to your listeners, your viewers. My my longest lasting career was a lifetime of teaching. Youth at risk, of course. And that term wasn't even used because it even body dysmorphic disorder was not recognized by the psychiatric community until the 1980s. So here I was in the 50s with my doctor giving my mother an iron tonic to swallow down at night, which did nothing to help. So what happens is with body dysmorphic disorder, you're depressed, but you're very, very concerned about your physical appearance. That means you might that little blackhead there. You're thinking of it like a giant piece of pimple or size of a nickel. You
Mm,
just really are over the top, and you can't get your hair just right. Male or female, you can't get your hair just right. So you spend a lot of time in front of the mirror, or you're so obsessed that with the problem that you avoid mirrors completely, and you need to have someone to, I don't want to say point that out to you, but someone to recognize that and ease you into realizing what you really look like. For
mm,
example, in eighth grade, I weighed 105 pounds. And when I looked in the mirror, I absolutely saw this 155-pound girl, big nose, chubby cheeks, the whole bit. So I never looked in mirrors again. I just didn't. So other than that, I mean, having body dysmorphic disorder is the next step beyond depression that relates to your self-image. You just don't see what's there. You really don't see that you are normal or attractive. You really think that no one is going to date you or that sort of thing, or no one's going to
mhm.
want to be your friend.
Hmm. Now, all of that is going on inside your own head, but
Yes.
where are the warning signs that maybe a parent or a teacher or an advisor of a fraternity and sorority, what are some of those early warning signs that they can pick that out in their members or their students?
Yes. Well, it's normal for a person of any age to want to look nice and to be concerned about the way they look, but it's when it's over the top that a person is really obviously upset in a big way. So parents need to, or parents and of course the adults in their surroundings at college uh, need to have an eye out for the things that like uh, as I said, just being self-obsessed, really. And of course, crying's a big thing.
Hmm.
And it's such an extreme. I can remember one extreme that my mother, of course, didn't understand. Nobody did. And when I was in high school, our neighbor was having a retirement party in the summer at her house. And I did not want to go because I thought, oh my God, people are going to see me, they're going to think, oh, there's that fat kid, blah, 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 blah. And my mother was insisting that I go. And it got to the point where I was crying and crying and crying. And I finally got my way and I stayed home and cried. And they all went to the retirement thing. But that's the thing, doing anything to get out of doing something that might call attention to you. That's another thing that is an obvious symptom.
Yeah, that's very helpful. I appreciate that. When I look at social media today, whether it be Instagram or TikTok or any of these platforms, we see a lot of people that are on those platforms and they've got perfectly sculpted abs,
Yes,
and they have filters that make you look
yes,
like you're wearing makeup and things like
yes.
that, that you're perfect, when in reality, none of that stuff is true. So, you talk about that distorted reflection that teens will see through social
Mhm.
media. What does that mirror do to a young person's self-worth?
Well, they feel worthless, really, because in those ages, in that age bracket, from 13 to 21, I suppose, when I graduated from college, I felt pretty secure. But in those ages, you are easily thinking that you're not worth being a friend and or being part of the activities that are going on around you.
Mm.
I'm
Yeah,
trying to think of what I haven't covered that would, without being too repetitious.
yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, that certainly makes sense. Okay, well, I think that's also pretty
Oh, I
helpful.
know what I was going to say is that, yes, your parents, teens and college students' parents certainly did not have exposure to social media.
Right.
So they don't even know what it's like to
No.
go into TikTok every day or Facebook and see their peers there looking like they just came off a television screen.
Hmm.
And, so you think that there's no way you could be that attractive, as you said, because of the screens and all the other ways of making a person look perfect.
Yeah, that's a good point. Our parents really didn't grow up in that age where they had that
Mhm.
platform, so they really can't understand what that's all about and how that's tied to your self-worth and your own self-image. The other interesting thing that about you is that you've trekked through countries like Morocco, Kazakhstan, Mongolia, Siberia, Jordan. Many of them you've done at age 67 and beyond.
Right.
So, how did this whole expedition hiking thing become part of your healing?
Well, it didn't really, it brought out my self-image, my
Mm,
self-confidence. That's what it did. It made
mm,
me much more self-confident. But the first time I was in Morocco was in 1975. And that's when there were no tourists there. I remember I was first year married, and my husband and I met only three or four Americans, and it just so happened that they were wearing Wallabies shoes, which were very common with college students at our age. And they were Peace Corps workers. They were the only Americans we saw the whole time we were there while we were driving along and the train is going and we're singing in Marrakesh Express at the top of our lungs, that kind of thing. So it was 40 years later that I went back to Morocco. My husband wasn't interested, and I hooked up. We won't use that phrase.
don't use
I
that phrase.
joined up. No, no, no. I joined up with an Australian group of trekkers who were going to Morocco. And so it was my revisiting. And after having that, I was hooked. But now here's the crazy part. The next year, I developed breast cancer.
Mm,
So that year, it just so happened I was healing from breast cancer in my bed with my phone. And I got a text, not a text, an email from that outfitter group in Australia saying that they were setting up another trial run. We were the only ones who did that Morocco thing, and apparently it was never continued, even though it was fabulous. I think their clientele wants something a little more than putting up tents in a sandstorm, that kind of thing.
Mm.
So anyway, there I was healing, and they said they have this other thing going to Kazakhstan, Siberia, and Mongolia. And was I interested? And they didn't know I was sitting there healing from breast cancer. So I immediately said, yes, send me up. When are we going? And it was the following September. And I joined them, and it was great. And so after that, well, then there was COVID. So I couldn't go anywhere during COVID. But then I did go to Jordan just 2 weeks before the war broke out between Gaza and Israel. But I am totally hooked on, I love the outdoors anyway. And I always say in the epigraph of my book, I have always loved wild places. I grew up on a 3-generation family farm in Massachusetts where my siblings and I were put out to pasture at an early age. We crawled on our berries in our stick forts and grazed on wild strawberries till the cows came home. And that was the way, here I was keeping track of my siblings at a very young age. And at Thanksgiving, I asked my sister if she remembered that. And she said, oh, yes. The little ones, the 4-year-old and 5-year-old loved crawling around in the woods under a tree.
Nice.
So, yes.
Very nice, very nice. I can tell you're a very creative person, and your story explores the power of imagination and creativity and education as a survival tool. So, how can college students use creativity as a mental health practice?
Oh, that's a great question. That's a great question. I have a great answer. But getting back to you said the creativity part. You don't have to be You don't have to be inherently artistic, but to be creative. And I think a journal is the best way to go. I have the I have a stack of journals, and the standard size is 5 inches. Whoops, where we go? Here we go. Five
Mhm.
inches by 8.5 inches.
Mhm.
And if you it's really valuable to keep a journal. Turn the page, put the date, put an emoticon for how you feel that day, then maybe even a little squiggle of what the weather is, the sunshine, rain coming down, and teardrops coming down, that too, it could be.
Mhm.
And write your feelings at once a day, either in the morning or at night. That will become the mirror of who you were that day. And believe me, don't chuck your journals. Mine got lost somehow, the ones from that period when we moved. But you open up that journal, and it will be a mirror of how you felt those first few days at college, or the turning point when you made this friend or that friend, or you bought a book that really inspired you, all those kinds of things. And you'll be really surprised that even your adventures is right there on campus.
Yeah, that's a good
But the
point.
journal
I
is a
wish
very good.
I wish I had something like that for college, just to see like what I was feeling at different times. I know my first semester freshman year trying to make friends, I'm sure there would be a
Right.
lot of down moments. But then as I started making friends
Yes.
and connections in fraternity and sorority life, then suddenly everything changes. So it would be cool to go
Yes.
back and see that progression.
Oh, yes, yes. Even journals from when my kids were little surprise me, because you think that you'll always remember those things. Well, you don't,
Yeah.
unless they were devastating. But you
Mhm.
just want to know what the flow was, and that's the great thing about journals.
Yeah. I think about some of those counseling centers that exist on college campuses today. Way back when I was in college, I certainly didn't take advantage of those counseling centers, and I should have because ultimately I discovered therapy and counseling later in life. But I
Hmm.
wish that I would have discovered it earlier on in life. And when you're
Hmm.
in college, those people, your tuition is going to pay those people that are working in that counseling center. They're already paid for. You know what I mean? Like,
Right,
you might
right,
as well take
right.
advantage of those people and have some conversations with them, because I think in terms of your mental health, I would certainly be helpful. But the problem is that if you're seen in these counseling centers, they look at you, other students will look at you as if you're broken, right? That
Uh-huh.
there's something wrong
Yes,
with you because otherwise,
yes.
why would you be hanging out in that area of the college? So,
Uh-huh.
what can college organizations do in order to reduce that stigma around depression and body
Mhm.
image issues?
Okay, well, I think that every dorm, fraternity, sorority should have a handout sheet that is put in whatever packet of materials that they get on that first day of school or move-in day or whenever,
Hmm.
or other things that are handed out at the first meeting of all the people living in that space. And it can have two columns, one for depression and one for body dysmorphic disorder. And that the college people, the adults, can prepare this sheet with typical kinds of depression: sad because I'm away from home for the first time. I miss my sister and brother, blah, blah, blah. Things that are perfectly normal, but just slight depression. That gives you actually three columns, doesn't it? Because you can have normal things that you feel when you move away. And then you can have depression. And okay, you're starting to feel bad and you really need to be getting out there more, etc. And then body dysmorphic disorder, the third column, when you are over the top and you don't even know it. But here are the symptoms. You are spending way too much time in the boys' room or girls' room in front of that mirror, trying to get your hair just right, change your clothes multiple times before you actually go out for the day. All the extreme things. I think that would be very helpful. Oh, and of course, at the bottom of that page, you have the resources that you were just referring to, the
Hmm.
counseling,
Yep.
the people, the resident assistant,
Advisor.
the
Hmm.
RA, or
Hmm.
whoever,
Yeah.
all of those people, and their phone numbers and emails, and just something that says like, does any of this ring a bell with you? We want to talk. We'll be happy to talk,
Hmm.
to you and help you out.
Yeah, I could see how that would be very helpful, certainly on move-in day, because yeah, we all go through similar, bouts of depression. It could be just not being around your family. It could be foods that you miss from home.
Yes, yes.
It could be all kinds of things, and that's very normal. But to have somebody to talk to about it, I think could be very, very helpful. So I think that's a great
Mhm.
suggestion. All right, this has been just very interesting, and I'm sure our listeners they all want to go and buy your book now. The book, of course, is called The Girl with the Black and Blue Doll. Where can our listeners go to buy the book and connect with you?
Well, they can follow me on Facebook, Linda Summersea,
Hmm.
author. It's funny because to have an author page, you have to have a human page. And so if you type in Linda Summersea, you might get the human page where I say, this is my whatever page, but I don't post here. I post on, and I have a link to Linda Summersea, author, and that I'm fairly active on that. And you can get my book at bookbaby.com, bookbaby, only because that was the publisher. And when you go to that site at the top of the page, there is the bookstore where you could get it. Now, any place you can get the ebook. Like Amazon, you can get the ebook and have it in 3 minutes. And but it says that I tried to buy it this morning myself, and it said it was out of stock, which of course it just became published. It was, it's for the first 30 days, it's in a period of in between publishing until it's out everywhere. And that was just last week. So the best way is to probably get the ebook or go to BookBaby, because BookBaby has it, of course, and you'll get it within a week, I'm sure. But yeah,
Perfect.
and I want to point out, even because I'm not a clinician, and there's not a whole lot of me pounding home what body dysmorphic disorder. You're just watching this kid who's actually a little bit humorous and sarcastic and funny at the same time, even though she's sad. In other words, she doesn't know this is different from other families. So something happens, you live with it and you go on with your life. But as a result, there are all these crazy things that happen, bad and good. And so
Yeah.
it's a fast moving story.
Excellent. All right. So we can go to bookbaby.com to go and buy the book, or you can go to Amazon and get the digital version. It's called The Girl with the Black and Blue Doll. You can also connect with Linda on her Facebook page. It's Linda Summersea Author, and she posts there quite a bit, so you can connect with her there. And fantastic. Well, thank you so much for sharing this, your memoir and all of these stories. This has been just really good to listen to. And I know that a lot of our listeners are going to hear parts of your story and it's going to really resonate with them because they've gone through similar things as well. So thank you for
Oh,
sharing all of that.
thank you, Dr. Aelon. Aelon?
Yes, you got it.
Aelon.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Michael Aelon. This has been a real pleasure. I loved it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And to our listeners, I have to tell you something. If you learned something today in this interview with Linda, I want you to share this episode with your fraternity or sorority chapter. Maybe it's in a group chat, or just share it on social media. You really never know who needs this message today. So go ahead and share that. That would be just a wonderful thing. So thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you on the next episode of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. Bye for now.